The following podcast is brought to you by PeacemakerNetwork.com. PeacemakerNetwork.com. Audio is provided by Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com.
In the Minneapolis school shooting, there were miracles within the tragedy. We will discuss both the tragedy and the miracles in this episode of Charlie Crimebuster. It is what some people are calling it the fastest minutes in podcasting.
The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are solely those of the individuals participating and do not represent those of city, county, state, or federal law enforcement agencies, nor sponsors and platforms of this presentation. The Charlie Crimebuster name and all forms and abbreviations are property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service. All individuals described or mentioned in the presentation should be considered innocent unless or until found guilty in a court of law. This presentation contains adult subject matter. Listener and viewer discretion is advised.
Well, hello and welcome to another episode of Charlie Crimebuster. I'm your host, Charlie Crimebuster, and today we will discuss and learn, well, today's podcast, I guess I should tell you, it's going to be somber and essential. So stay with us, won't you? And while we get to this Minneapolis school shooting, don't forget to help us help others. Go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe so you'll be notified every time we drop an episode. Hit me up at charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you. And before we get into today's program, don't forget to check out our sponsor, PeacemakerNetwork.com. Well, ladies and gentlemen, last week, once again, our lives were interrupted by the sound of gunfire. And that gunfire was in our minds as we thought about precious children being ambushed in a place where they should be able to feel safe. We're going to tell you that story today and how out of the darkness of tragedy, there were lights of hope. Lights of hope emerged. And in sorrow, grace and strength were acknowledged. We do on this podcast share with you stories of true crime, but this one is somewhat different. But it doesn't get any more true than when you talk about the crime against our children. Now, before we get into this, let me say again, there should be a content warning. This episode contains discussions of gun violence, school shooting, and it may be distressing for some listeners. So please take care while listening. Also, because of the serious content of today's podcast, we're going to forego our Crazy Crook story. There'll be plenty of them coming after this one. So while this past weekend, families across America were taking one last holiday to end their summer vacations. It was Labor Day for families in Minneapolis. But Labor Day for some of those families in Minneapolis, especially those who attended the Catholic school where this shooting took place, well, they were facing a much different Labor Day weekend. Picnics and fun were replaced with sorrow and grief for the 2 children that were killed and the 17 others that were wounded or injured. It was a cool morning in a day that was just like any other there at the Catholic Church and the Annunciation School. Children there were attending a back-to-school mass. Now, when we talk about the Annunciation Catholic Church, the church is named after that which refers to the annunciation of the Archangel Gabriel to Mary that she will bear Christ. This school goes from pre-K to 8th grade, had 391 students enrolled in the 23-24 school year. That's according to the National Center for Educational Statistics. Each grade level had 2 classes, with about 20 students in each class. It is located in the Wyndham neighborhood, about 5 miles, south of downtown Minneapolis. Now, the school website says that teachers there, quote, unquote, focus on Christian values and civic mindedness. And the principal, Matt DeBoer, he said that during the shooting, adults protected the children, with older children protecting the younger ones. It was also a day when everything changed. In this setting, peace was shattered with the actions of a lone gunman. 23-year-old Robert Westman, armed with a rifle, shotgun, and pistol. He approached the side of the church, shot through the windows toward the children inside before dying by suicide. We know now that the shooter fired over 100 rounds into that church. Left behind at the scene, 3 shotgun shells. 110 rifle rounds. One live ammo, which appeared to be from a pistol that misfired at least that once. The tragic results? 2 children are killed, ages 8 to 10. 17 others, including 14 other children, are injured. Now, I thought about just calling the episode Miracles in Minneapolis, for my friend, I want you to know, with over 100 rounds fired into a church sanctuary, it is truly a miracle that more were not killed and wounded. Adults acted in a heroic way in protecting the children. Doors were secured. Older students protected younger students. Let me tell you about a 5th grader by the name of Weston. Weston told reporters he ducked under the pews, covering his head. Then he said he was shielded by a friend who was lying on top of him. His friend was hit. Here's what he said. I was super scared for him, but I think now he's okay. That's what the 10-year-old said, adding that he was also praying for other hospitalized children and adults. You know, I guess this is probably as good a place as any to mention another attack that took place on that day. There was an attack on people's faith. And it is understandable that people would perhaps have questions about God and faith in this terrible tragedy. After all, this attack took place at God's house while children, were praying. It can cause many people to question the value of their own faith. Even the Archbishop himself said, he talked about the inscription at front of the Annunciation Church that reads, House of God and the Gate of Heaven. He went on to say, quote, how is it that such a terrible tragedy could take place in a place that's the house of God and the gate of heaven? That's what he asked, and then he said, it's unthinkable. So here's what I say to those who would talk to defame those of faith. I feel sorry for you. I feel sorry for you that you have not learned the true meaning of prayer. You have not learned that prayer is not a quick get-out-of-jail card in the monologue of life, but it is a help in the time of the ever-present evil of tragedy. So the next time people make fun of you for saying you're praying for the good people of Minnesota, don't bat an eye. You're doing a great service for those people. You're helping them by asking God to bless and strengthen them in a time of need. When I was a young teenager, I learned a lesson in life. A man who I admired lost his son in an automobile accident. I asked him, just point blank, how he could bear such a loss with such grace and dignity. I saw that in his face, and yet I knew how very much he loved his son. He simply said to me, Donnie, the God that blesses me in the joys of life gives me strength in the loss of life. Another prominent family in our community who lost their own precious daughter. This man, who was a leader in the community, said in her funeral, the funeral of his own daughter, that people said to him, how is it that your family that's so full of faith in God, could have experienced such a loss? His answer, while in deep grief, said, why should I not think that my family is any different? The Bible says it rains on the just and the unjust, those that have faith and those who do not have faith. It is just that when it rains on the people of faith have an umbrella of faith to help them in the cruel, cold rain of life. Now, if this is too preachy for you, no apologies from me. It is a bare truth. Faith works, and faith was at work in the midst of tragedy in the Minnesota area this past week. Enough said about that at this time. Now, the victims and their families are holding tight on their faith in the uncharted waters that this school body hoped that they would never have to journey through. So, let's take a moment and let's talk about the shooter. I'm not going to name the victims' names. I don't want to give them any unwelcome publicity. But I am going to talk about the shooter so that we might learn some things to help us identify something, anything, that would help us prevent such actions in the future. You know, we've often talked about that there are steps of a mass shooter on this program. And we pointed out to you that if we can intervene within those steps, we may be able to stop a mass shooting before it happens. And there are a number of times that actually happens here in our country. Many times through the year that you never even hear about, where people saw something, said something, and they stopped a mass shooter in the midst of planning or in the midst of carrying out their terrible, terrible thoughts. And as I tell you about this shooter, please note that you can certainly see the steps in his journey to evil. And you can see for yourself how the planning stage is revealed in what we know about him today. I do need to remind you that some of the things we're about to reveal are unusually dark and evil. Please use discretion and avoid it if it's necessary for your mental health. This is what we know about the shooter. This deranged gunman who slaughtered 2 children, injured at least 17 others at the Catholic school in Minneapolis, well, he's been identified as a transgender woman. As disturbing videos posted by the shooter actually showed a handwritten manifesto. That manifesto, one thing said, "Kill Donald Trump." Another one, "For all the children," was actually scrawled on gun magazines. And just hours before this cowardly massacre, this guy by the name of Robin Westman, 23 years of age, he posted a series of twisted videos on YouTube. And in these videos, it did issue a manifesto. Minneapolis Police Chief Brian O'Hara, he confirmed this at a press conference. Went on to explain these videos. In one 20-minute video with Westman, he flips through a disturbing handwritten manifesto. Much of it's written in a homespun code, uses Cyrillic characters and English phonetic words. In the deranged writings, he gleefully fantasizes about being that scary, horrible monster standing over those powerless kids. And he reverently confesses admiration for the 2012 Sandy Hook massacre. Now, Westman, he applied to change his birth name from Robert to Robin in Dakota County, Minnesota, when he was 17 years of age. That's according to court documents. That name change? Granted, in January 2020. The petition added that Westman identifies as a female, wants her name to reflect that identification. But 5 years later, well, Robin or Robert, whichever one, seemed to have backed away from that identity. In fact, he said, "I don't want to dress girly all the time, but I guess sometimes I really like it. I know I'm not a woman, but I definitely don't feel like a man." That's what was written. "I really like my outfit. I look pretty, smart, modest. I think I want to wear something like this for my shooting." He also went into great detail about his decision to target Annunciation. This is where he graduated from grade school in 2017. That was according to a yearbook that was obtained by CNN. His mother, Mary Grace Westman, also worked as a secretary at the school, also an administrative assistant, I read, until she retired in 2021. He goes on to say, "I'm feeling good about Annunciation." In other words, that's his target. "It seems like a combo of easy attack form and devastating tragedy." Did you hear that? Easy attack form and devastating tragedy. "But I want to do some more research," he said. He said, "I have concerns about finding a large enough group. I want to avoid any parents." And then he talked about pre- and post-school drop-off, which means, I guess, that he would avoid parents if he didn't shoot them during that time. He goes on to say, "Maybe I could attack an event at the on-site church," which we know now is what he did. He said, scribbled on his writings, "I think attacking a large group of kids coming in from recess is my best plan." That was another plan he had. "Then from there, I can go inside and kill, going for as long as I can." Now, reports tell us that he tried to get inside that church, but he could not because they had locked the door and blocked it with boards to keep him from coming in. Now, near the end of the video, Westman flicks through a number of blank pages before reaching what appears to be a drawing. oddly enough, that showed the very inside of the church, saying, "Ha ha, nice," as he stops turning the pages. He then takes out a knife, stabs it to the center of the sketch, his hand momentarily quivering. Before then he withdraws the blade and he quietly mumbles, "Kill myself." In a video titled "So Long and Thanks for All the Fish," Westman slowly turns the pages of the red notebook that's laid out on top of what appears to be all kinds of gun diagrams. As he flips the pages, an occasional plume of smoke is seen from the bottom of the screen. And then, of course, it's punctuated by coughs, disjointed cursing, and all kinds of spooky giggles. Each page is filled with inscrutable handwritten ramblings, such as, quote, "I have had thoughts about mass murder for a long time. I'm very conflicted writing this journal." And then he says, "I need to get my thoughts out without getting on a watch list. Ha ha." In another writing, he actually wrote, "If I can carry out a racially motivated attack, it would be most likely against Zionist Jews." That was before he called Jewish people entitled, penny sniffing. And then he added, "Free Palestine." He said, "I hate fascism." Yet another page, following up shortly with, "I also love when kids get shot. I love to see kids get torn apart." Well, this demented manifesto, it certainly sheds light on what appears to be a truly disturbed mind filled with hate. And he talks about a grand final act, stating even desire to take out a target of political and societal significance. Target like Elon Musk, Trump, or some significant executive. But he also claimed that he had no political moves. He said, "I don't want to do it to spread a message. I do it to please myself. I do it because I am sick." That's what he wrote. The unhinged shooter went on to express sincere admiration for mass shooters, especially Sandy Hook's killer. He said, "I have a deep fascination with one person in particular," talking about Adam, the Sandy Hook killer. He wrote that in a journal on May 23rd in reference to the 20-year-old perpetrator of the worst elementary school shooting in U.S. history. Remember that one? That left 20 first-grade students, 6 adults dead. "Sandy Hook was my favorite, I think." He talked about his exposure of school shootings. Now, Westman, as we said earlier, he died of a self-inflicted gunshot wound, and he was armed with a rifle, a shotgun, and a handgun, all of which he brought legally. He walked up to that church, shot through the windows, and shot those students. According to the Minneapolis police chief, the shooter was not previously known to law enforcement. But yet, my friend, you can see the evil that was manifested in his sick mind. Now, it appears at this moment, in everything that we can review and everything that I've seen, that these red flags that we see in these writings were pretty well kept to himself. He had somehow tried to make sure that when he had died himself, that it would be uploaded on YouTube. And it was for a moment, but then they, of course, took it off. It is sad and unimaginable that anyone could know that this guy was thinking these things and not alert law enforcement. I don't have any evidence whatsoever that anybody knew that he had these plans. But while we're talking about it, there's probably somebody else out there right now with these same kind of thoughts bouncing off the walls of their sick brain. And if you do uncover anybody else writing things along these lines, saying things like this guy said, having this kind of behavior, purchasing 3 weapons all at once when they never had any before, going to a gun range to practice and not have any idea why they're doing it now, and knowing that it wasn't for their self-protection but for other reason, nefarious thoughts, then my friend, you do need to say something. If you see something, say something. And if you yourself who are listening, if you find yourself dropping into this black hole, if you're listening to this podcast because you're fascinated with school shootings, and you have somehow a desire to be a perpetrator of some evil carnage like this, please, please, I beg you, reach out for help before you hurt or harm or kill innocent others. Now, I certainly do not want to end this podcast on this sad, dark reporting. So let's take a moment and let's talk about the miracles of Minnesota. First, we know now that the school had practiced drills for classroom shootings. Now, admittedly, this was not a shooter who targeted them in the classroom. He was familiar with the school. He knew about that mass that would bring them all to the church, and he made the church mass assembly his target. But even then, the training kicked in. When the shooting started, the adults began to yell, down, 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 get down, do not get up, get down. Adults went to reinforce the doors so he could not enter to do additional damage. Teachers, and they did that, by the way, making themselves targets as they ran to secure those doors. Teachers sought to get children under the cover, under pews, and this sort of thing. Even the older students sheltered the smaller children with their own bodies. The miracles of Minneapolis. The first responders were there quick. Immediately gave first aid while waiting for the EMTs and the medical personnel to arrive. Police officers were trained to treat gunshot victims. They had trained and they knew that stopping the bleeding immediately could save lives. They put pressure on wounds. They did tourniquets where needed. And they helped the wounded to get to ambulances for immediate transfer. The hospitals there were on alert. They had trained. They had experience. They knew what they were doing. And they worked quickly, thankfully, to save those that were brought to their care. Yes, among the hate, there was love. Among the evil, there was good. Within the tragedy, there were miracle workers. And yes, there was and will be prayers. Prayers, just the thought of praying for you, someone praying for you, that should encourage you. And it should remind all of us we're all just one prayer away from crisis. Vice President J.D. Vance is a Catholic. He also joined this conversation when people were ridiculing prayer and saying, well, prayer. You just say pray for people. That's all you ever do, which that is untrue. Nobody said pray and that's all you do, but they began to ridicule prayer. So here's what J.D. Vance said about it in response to these anti-prayer people. The Vice President of the United States said these very words. He says, any criticism of prayer is bizarre. He went on to say, we pray because our hearts are broken, he wrote. We pray because we know God listens. We pray because we know God works in mysterious ways and can inspire us to further action. And then he went on to say, why do you feel the need to attack other people for praying when the kids were just killed praying? Yes, those who ridiculed these children praying and ridiculed people saying that we're praying for Minneapolis, my friend, those who ridiculed it, it was a cheap shot from those who are in the cheap seats of life. Cheap shot to criticize prayer. No one I know praying today is not saying, there are saying, that we cannot do more to stop this occurring again. We do know that we can do more, and the message is not to pray and do nothing. The message is faith without works is dead. It's nothing. Prayer enables us to see more clearly solutions and gives us courage to implement those solutions. So, my friend, another school shooting. What are our lessons? Number 1, pray for those in Minneapolis. Number 2, hold your loved ones close to you. Life is fragile, and that life can escape us in many different ways. It's not just school shootings that take our loved ones away. It's automobile accidents, it's disease, it's one-on-one crime. It's a number of things. Domestic violence. So please, hold your loved ones close to you. Number 3, be vigilant. Protect your loved ones. Talk to your own children about what happens if there's a mass shooting, how they need to immediately get cover, concealment, run, hide, and even fight if you have to. And then number 4, be observant. If you see something, say something. Well, this is Charlie Crimebuster, and I'm reminding you today as we close off on this particular episode, I'm reminding you, be safe, be alert. Yep. For the life you save, it may be your very own.
You have been listening to Charlie Crimebuster. You can find additional information and podcasts at charliecrimebuster.com. We would like to thank our sponsor, the Peacemaker Network, and also encourage you to support the first responders, military, and law enforcement personnel by contributing to the Peacemaker Network. That's peacemakernetwork.com. All music and sound effects are courtesy of Pixabay.com. That's Pixabay.com. You can also support us by subscribing to our YouTube channel, tag @CharlieCrimebuster, and then click the subscribe button. By doing so, you'll be notified each time we drop one of our shows. Another more convenient way for you to listen to our podcasts, or for you to say to your smart speaker, play Charlie Crimebuster. If you have comments or suggestions, we would love to hear from you, so please send them to charliecrimebuster@gmail.com. That's charliecrimebuster@gmail.com, or you can call or text us at 407-917-2211. That's 407-917-2211. Thank you for listening, and we hope that you will join us again for another exciting crime episode with Charlie Crimebuster.